The rusted "Welcome to Silent Hollow" sign groaned. It was a warning disguised as a greeting. Detective Inspector Miller, a man who scoffed at ghost stories, stepped out of his car. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Fear. He adjusted his trench coat, the only shield against the oppressive atmosphere. Silent Hollow. A town drowning in whispers of the past, and tonight those whispers were about murder. The victim? Aleister Crowley, found dead in his own home. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses. Just whispers of the old Crowley curse. Miller scoffed. Curses didn't kill people. People killed people. And he intended to find out who. His gaze swept over the town, a collection of weather-beaten buildings huddled together as if seeking comfort from some unseen terror. He had work to do. The fog came with the sunset, a slow, creeping menace that swallowed the town whole. Miller pulled his collar tighter, the damp seeping into his bones. He stood before the Crowley house, a Victorian mansion with eyes that watched from every darkened window. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the lingering presence of something long gone. He examined the study, the scene of the crime. A single overturned chair hinted at a struggle. Or maybe just a ghost, Miller thought wryly. He ran a hand over the polished surface of the desk, finding it free of dust. Curious. He felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, a feeling of being watched. He spun around, but the room was empty. Just the wind, he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. The house creaked around him, a chorus of groans and whispers. He had a feeling this was going to be a long night. The town archives were housed in the basement of the library, a subterranean labyrinth with the distinct aroma of mildew and forgotten things. Miller squinted in the dim light, sifting through dusty records. He was searching for any mention of Aleister Crowley, anything that could offer a motive, a suspect, something besides the supernatural. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows of the library. He found it, tucked away in a faded ledger, a property dispute bitter and long-standing between Aleister Crowley and a man named Elijah Croft. The name sent a chill down Miller's spine. Elijah Croft, the town recluse, said to dabble in the occult, rumored to have vanished years ago. Just another ghost story, Miller reminded himself. But the hair on the back of his neck prickled again. This case was getting stranger by the minute. The Croft house loomed on the edge of town, a skeletal silhouette against the storm-ridden sky. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the house's face, twisted in a silent scream. Miller approached cautiously, his hand hovering near the service weapon at his hip. He felt it again, the sensation of being watched, but this time it was stronger, more insistent. He pushed open the creaking door, stepping into the darkness within. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay and something else, something cold and malevolent. He heard a noise, a soft whisper, coming from the floor above. He drew his weapon, his senses on high alert. "Police!" he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. No response, only the sound of his own breathing and the incessant pounding of his heart. He made his way up the stairs, each step a creak in the silence. The feeling of dread intensified. He was walking into something dangerous. He could feel it in his bones. The whispers led him to a dusty attic, filled with cobwebs and long-forgotten belongings. He swept the beam of his flashlight across the room, catching glimpses of covered furniture, stacks of books, and a rocking chair that swayed gently despite the stillness of the air. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The room was freezing, the temperature dropping drastically. He saw it then, a faint glow emanating from beneath a pile of old clothes. He cautiously moved towards it, his heart pounding in his chest. He brushed aside the clothes, revealing a small wooden box. He opened it, his breath hitching as he saw the contents. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a silver locket. It was identical to the one described in Aleister Crowley's missing possessions report. The locket was warm to the touch, radiating heat despite the freezing temperature of the attic. This was no ordinary evidence. This was touched by something else. The old town medium, Agatha, lived in a ramshackle cottage on the outskirts of Silent Hollow. She was a legend whispered in hushed tones, feared and respected in equal measure. Miller, a man of logic and reason, found himself drawn to her doorstep. He needed answers, and something told him she held the key. He knocked, the sound swallowed by the silence of the night. The door creaked open, revealing Agatha, her eyes as ancient and knowing as the town itself. "You seek answers, Detective Inspector," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. He nodded, stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of incense and something else, a strange energy that crackled in the air. Agatha gestured for him to sit. "The spirits are restless," she said, her gaze piercing. "They whisper of a darkness, a hunger that consumes." Miller listened, his skepticism warring with a growing sense of unease. The line between the rational and the inexplicable was blurring, and he wasn't sure he liked what he saw. Armed with Agatha's cryptic warnings and the locket clutched tightly in his hand, Miller found himself drawn back to the Crowley mansion. The fog had lifted, revealing a starless night sky. The house loomed before him, its windows like vacant eyes. He could feel a presence here, a cold, watchful entity. He had a feeling he wasn't alone. He entered the house, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He made his way back to the study, drawn by an invisible force. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropping with each step he took. He felt a cold breath on the back of his neck and then a voice, a whisper that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. "Leave," it hissed, the voice laced with a chilling malice. Miller stood his ground, his jaw set in determination. He was close, he could feel it. The ghostly whispers led him to a hidden panel in the study wall, concealed behind a bookshelf. He pried it open, revealing a narrow passageway. He didn't hesitate, his instincts urging him forward. The passage led to a secret room, its air thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. And there, in the center of the room, stood a figure. Elijah Croft. Alive, but barely. He looked more specter than man, his eyes hollow, his skin stretched taut over bone. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "The spirits. They warned me you were coming," he croaked, his voice weak. He held up a hand, the silver locket Miller had found glinting in the dim light. A memento of my greatest deception. Miller stared at him, his mind racing. The truth was within reach. Elijah Croft, driven mad by his lust for the Crowley fortune and fueled by dark magic, had faked his own death and used elaborate illusions and the town's superstition to cover his tracks. He'd murdered Aleister Crowley, making it look like the work of the vengeful spirits he himself had conjured. Miller arrested Croft, his confession echoing in the silent room. As Croft was led away, a cold wind swept through the house, extinguishing the lantern and plunging the room into darkness. When light returned, he was gone, vanished. Miller stood alone in the silence, the weight of the town's haunted history pressing down on him. The case was closed, the mystery solved. But some secrets, he realized, were destined to remain buried, whispered on the wind, forever haunting Silent Hollow.